Now it's time for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning with our ever-consistent Dr. Constance Ikoku.
Good morning, Benga.
Good morning, Dr. Constance.
The top journalist from Africa. I'm giving it back to you today.
No.
Yesterday you went on very flowery about me, so let me try to match you.
Good one.
Right, I just think it's very appropriate to celebrate and recognize hard work and diligence.
Hard work indeed. Yolanda, good morning. I mean, waking up every day.
Good morning,
3:30 a.m.
Oh, no.
It is hard work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I hope everyone is good this morning.
Yes, thank you. I hope you are too.
I am. I'm fantastic. All right. Hello there and welcome to the program. We'll be looking at those stories that are shaping the agenda for you. Kicking off with this day newspaper. Major Nigerian newspapers this morning are leading with coverage of mass abductions of worshippers in Kaduna State and reactions to that story. Coverage from business and national news sections includes Nigeria's diplomatic and economic presence at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Insecurity and rescue operations are front and center, while dispute over the Abuja tool and policy shift toward technical education and skills development feature in various titles. Now, this day leads with that abduction story from Kaduna State, with Christian Association of Nigeria unimpressed with the initial denial of the incident, describing it as disturbing. Minister of Foreign Affairs Yusuf Tugar asked investors not to write Nigeria off due to insecurity. And Glencore, AFC, Mauritius Bank, Fidelity sue First Bank trustees and receiver Abubakar Sulu Gambari. Vanguard newspaper opens with Arewa Consultative Forum, Christian Association of Nigeria and other organizations still on Kaduna State demanding rescue of victims of the church abduction. Air Force Commander says oil thieves are now operating more sophisticated networks. And the federal government to scrap HND dichotomy and empower polytechnics to award degrees. Leadership writes about Governor Abba Yusuf of Kano, who says he will sign a death warrant for killers of Kano mother and her 6 children. The Kaduna abductions piece here has a different angle, with news that a nursing mother and a 3-week-old baby are among over 100 victims. Daily Independent still on Kaduna abductions. Obi, Atiku, PDP and Khan query deniers as they urge urgent attention. To Ogun State, where the governor halts selection process for the Awujela stool again as Department of State Services weighed in. Now ADC condemns planned release of 70 bandits from prison. New Telegraph leads with insecurity, reporting that troops have discovered mass grave of terrorists killed during clearance operations. Labour Party court sacks National Chairman Julius Abure, orders INEC to recognize Nadadi Usman-led ESCO. And the military has revealed that illegal refineries now mix chemicals with crude oil. And to the banking sector, where Nigeria Interbank Settlement System reports that digital payment fraud losses is down by 51%. The Punch turns attention to efforts by the federal government to accelerate the trial of 5,000 insurgents. The Daily Times puts a spotlight on the Kaduna abductions, while also highlighting federal government's commitment to a credible, acceptable census. Daily Sun writes about the Labour Ministry budget, which is raising flags, 18.3 billion naira, as agencies fund roads, stadia, and palace. The EFCC returns 1.28 billion naira from Sujimoto to Enugu State government. The Guardian goes for an analysis of the verdict of the Labour Party leadership and how it alters opposition politics in 2027. And Nigeria of West Africa diesel import from India, says another piece from The Guardian. Daily Trust reports that 5 soldiers have been killed and many injured in Boko Haram suicide attack. And the All Progressives Congress National Chairman says there will be no appointment for non-APC members. The National Hajj Commission petitions President Tinubu asks for removal of chairman. Let's move to the international headlines. Daily Telegraph. Multiple papers lead with the U.S. President Donald Trump's statements on Greenland, reporting that he has announced a framework for a future deal on Greenland at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He paused tariff threats against the UK and other European nations and ruled out force to take the country. Allies are cautiously welcoming the diplomatic shift, although details are still unclear. This was covered widely from Daily Telegraph to the Daily Mail. Then Financial Times has that story. The Guardian, as well as the front page of the Daily Times, all have covered it. Daily Mirror calls Trump daddy fool, emphasizing what it calls his rants, while Daily Star leads with the headline, Man-Baby Mayhem. It's a done deal. Daily Express focuses on years of rising business rates hitting pub landlords, warning of closures and economic strain on the hospitality sector. Metro.co.uk highlights a story involving Donald Trump's son, Barron, who called UK police from the US when he saw a friend being hit after a rape over video call. Now let's break down what the stories mean for everyday citizens. This is a newspaper again. The abduction story from Kaduna State. The confusion that ensued initially with deniers, and Christian Association of Nigeria bearing his mind here, saying it's very unhappy with that initial denial, Benga. Very briefly.
I would like to reiterate that question. How soothing would a governor's promise be for the families and loved ones of abducted people who are waiting in bated breath for the return of their loved ones in sound health and not being tampered with, hoping that they've not been messed up with. So we know the public space went through this back and forth over so much controversy about the reports of the Kajuru abduction until the Christian Association of Nigeria stood their ground that they have a structure, and they are very, and they demonstrated that they are very thorough with their findings and with their reports. And the government had to listen to the Christian Association of Nigeria. Now the government has come out to promise that the government at both the subnational level and at the federal level will do everything possible to secure the release of these abductees. But it's rather unfortunate that we've wasted so much time.
Right.
We've lost so much ground in what could have been a strong recovery process. I think that we need to bring everyone together to know that the security task is a collective responsibility for everyone. The government cannot do it in isolation, so they need to listen to people on the ground, and that still re-emphasizes and resonates the call for state policing. Because once there is this structure on the ground, there will be a cooperation at both levels to nip this threat on the ground. As it is, the country still faces an existential threat.
It's deeply unfortunate that so much time was spent in denying the kidnapping of these people. We've had numerous of these reports in the past couple of months. So to now come and backtrack, it really does make it very difficult for the public to now trust what the government says and does, especially when it comes to these areas of insecurity, banditry, kidnapping, which have been so very much rampant. Now, I know that the governor, from the report that we took earlier, has given so many assurances to the people as well, and even gone as far as saying that they would build a military base that were close to the location. But, you know, we wonder at this point in time, just as you've rightly said, and I have echoed as well, are these words going to translate into credible actions that we can hold the government to?
All right, let's stay with this day newspaper. Minister of Foreign Affairs Yusuf Togo asked investors not to write off Nigeria yet. in spite of all the insecurity challenges that we're facing, Yolanda.
And rightly said so. You know, it's not yet time to write off Nigeria. Yes, there's a plethora of issues that Nigeria is currently facing, like we just spoke about, the terrorism, the banditry. But at the same time, we see Nigeria trying to put their best foot forward. We are literally fighting for our reputation at the moment by trying to have these global conversations, these discussions with the World Economic Forum, with the just concluded Abu Dhabi Sustainability Summit. So I think that is a wonderful statement to put out there. We need investors in Nigeria. We need Nigeria to take off and be better than it was in the past.
All right. I mean, there's another way to also look at that statement coming from the minister. When you look at past history and what's going on today, also, Africa's geopolitical risk have often been exaggerated through Western lens and through mainstream Western international media. And they usually lump together diverse countries on the continent in terms of reporting about investment in those states, writing them off mostly as unstable. And that is often not the case. The progress and failures in Africa are not uniform, actually. There are countries that are doing way better than the others. You know, there are top countries, there are middle countries, there are ones that are at the bottom completely. But when you look at reportage and coverage, it is, you know, usually tarred with one brush, and everyone thinks that it's the same thing, while that is not the case. And so what the case that is making is actually a good case. However, nobody will write your story for you. The hunter has to write his own story, and that's one of the lessons that we also have to learn from what is currently going on internationally. We also know that historically, most companies that have invested in Africa have huge returns that they never bargained for, returns that were not seen initially before they go in. There is money to be made in Africa. If there is no money, you would not see all these foreign companies operating within the continent. The only thing is that there is that terrible perception which is difficult to shake off, you know, but there is money to be made. The last point here is that, yes, there are real structural weaknesses and problems and failures, and we see that here in Nigeria, and we cannot, you know, argue against that. So the bottom line then is there is work for us to be, you know, for us to do, and for some African countries to do, in order to make sure that these structural challenges are overcome, and to make the countries a place where investment can be made very easily, and, you know, there will be returns, and that Indeed. Also the economies are moved forward. Let's move to New Telegraph newspaper. Labour Party court sacks National Chairman Julius Abure, orders the Independent National Electoral Commission to recognize the Nanadi Usman-led ESCO. Senator Nanadi Usman now has been affirmed as the legitimate leader of the party. The court noted that Abure's tenure has expired, echoing an earlier Supreme Court judgment. Abure's faction has said it intends to challenge this decision. Well, this means that this is not the end of the dispute, but that critics consider Julius Abure a huge disappointment with regard to the way he has run the Labour Party, especially because it's a party that was embraced as a vehicle for change in 2023. They had so much goodwill, all that now is completely vanished.
Okay, now beyond Julius Abure and Nanadi Usman, let's look at the bigger picture. I think it underscores the need, the fundamental need for judicial and electoral reforms, because now this judgment is coming. This ruling is coming up now at just a few days to the area council election, and barely a year to the general election. So we know the implication of this in the party's electoral race for major elections like this. But now coming to the issue of this back and forth between the Julius Abure camp and all that. I think the Supreme Court ruling of 2025 was very fundamental, and that I hold very responsible, because the Supreme Court ruled that it held the Nanadi faction's motion valid. But the overriding ruling was that the whole affair is an internal party matter. So it looks like the court abdicating its own role and leaving the party that had come for adjudication to its own fate. So now it took the Peter Lifu court to now pronounce this judgment, which is still subject to an appeal. So when you look at the timeline, there is a need for an urgent reform. This thing started in 2021 when Abure was pronounced, became the acting national chairman after the death of the former national chairman of the party, and at expanded stakeholders meeting at Inewi, which was in Abia State rather, which was hosted by the governor Alex Oti, and Peter Obi then was in Labour Party, and as a result of the leadership crisis, they had to come up with a 29-man caretaker committee, which now the judgment has said that it is a necessity. So in pronouncing a judgment, there is a need for clarity.
Right.
You cannot afford to be making ambiguous judgments. So what Peter Lifu really did was to adopt that Supreme Council and tinker around it. But there's been lots of lost ground in this issue. I
mean, the other common reaction to this judgment is that Julius Abule's removal as Labour Party chairman, following Peter Obi's sort of forced exit, suggests that the party leadership may have been strategically aligned with forces intent on undermining Mr. Peter Obi. So why now? Why is he being forced out? While for a whole year or more than a year, there was that tussle back and forth. So it just reinforces that perception that internal structures were worked, in line with other parties in order to weaken the Labour Party. Yeah. Secondly, all that has happened really damages the Labour Party. Because like I said before, it was a party that there was so much goodwill, and people were hoping that this will be the party that helps change the face of Nigeria, hoping to bring about a new dawn in the country. But, soon after the elections, it completely fell apart. So whatever the party decides to do now, Julius Abure says they'll be going to court. The sequence leading to these events has completely weakened the party. So I don't know where they go from here and whether they will be able to recover. I think that underscores the need for the Nenade faction to immediately and as a matter of urgency to pursue a political reconciliation. Right. Because as I've always said here, whether anybody likes the sound of my voice or not, the president, who is also is a very skillful politician that can latch into every lacuna, every crack in opposition party to gain a political advantage for himself. All right. So you don't play that divide and rule, that cracky, fragmented politics with a very skillful president. Let's do the other story. Daily Independent, Ogun State government halts selection process again as the Department of State Services waits in. That chaos in the Awujale tussle mirrors the societal collapse that occurs not only in Western-style democracy, as we see in political parties, we just talked about Labour Party, but also in traditional politics. In this story, DSS summoned kingmakers and contenders. The Awujale King Council makers had planned to meet nominees, but this was cancelled, and the nominees were instead directed to report to the Department of State Services office in Ijebu-Ode. So Ogun State government has suspended the whole thing. Yolanda, I mean, this reminds me of Chinua Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart. The center can no longer hold. Actually, let me remind you people that I'm from Ijebu-Ode, but you can go. Yolanda, quickly. And
yes. It's very interesting that you would mention that, Dr. Constance, because I was thinking along the same things when I was going through the report and trying to get a better understanding. And so it's also important to understand that the Awujale influences development, education, so many things among the Ijebus, and as well that these Ijebus, they number in the millions. Now, these millions are the equivalent of some countries. So this is not just a mere dispute. The decision of Awujale is a kingdom-making decision, That's also a national voice in the significance of decisions that are made. So, I mean, the government stepping in and, trying to bring these irregularities, these accusations of bribery, I think this is a positive step to resolving this type of issue. Benga, you were taking this very personally as a man of the Ijebu.
Don't give us 1 hour history, please. We don't have have time.
But first and foremost, it's important to sincerely note that the Ijebus have one of the most advanced political system in the world, and the system that leads to the coronation or the selection of the kingship. First and foremost, we have the Ijebu political system being governed by 4 ruling houses.
Right.
The Igbelebua, the Anikilaya, the Fushebuya, and the Fushebunwa, and the Fidipote. Now, the former Awujale, after the late Awujale, having ruled for about 65 years, it's now the turn of Fushebua. So we have that careful selection pattern of ascension to kingship. So how the Awujale king makers allowed that selection to have dragged this long is a real setback to a culture that stands as a beacon of pride to Africa. And so I think that the well-meaning people of Ijebu land need to come together, speak with the governor, speak with all the stakeholders to address this so that we can have the next Awujale emerging from a credible pattern.
Absolutely.
This is not happening only in Ijebu land.
Yes.
All across Nigeria, you know, I come from the east. When you come to the selection of the Igwe, there's fierce tussle.
Yeah,
and
especially as 2027 election is around the corner.
This just mirrors the total out of control of the entire country with regard to order, with regard to processes, with regard to reliable systems. And what we actually call progress today may be described as retrogression, because you may have taller, shinier, bigger buildings and highways and roads. Those are hardwares. Those are not what advances a country. What advances a country is more of software in terms of what holds it together. You know, the order, the processes, the traditions, the systems that are embedded and entrenched and allow people to behave in a manner that leads to some, you know, solid progression. So that's why I brought up the Chinua Achebe's novel, Things Fall Apart. And please let me really share it. These lines that he got from W.B. Yeats' poem, The Second Coming, which begins with the words, turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. So the whole, when you look at the whole thing, it talks about uncontrollable. Spiraling, disintegration of order, a concept that Achebe applies to the cultural fragmentation of Nigeria. A novel he wrote so many years ago, but which speaks aptly of what is going on in today. I mean, in essence, those two novels, Yeats' poem and Achebe's novel, just shows how all structures that we have relied on have been completely shattered. The loss of meaning, you know, the rise of chaos when traditional unifying forces can no longer
I think
hold.
everyone must rise to protect the sanctity of our traditional system, because at the end of the day, that is the beacon of our identity. That's right. The symbol of our pride, and a symbol of who we are as a people.
Right. I mean, it's either we take moments to reflect and turn around, or the disintegration just continues.
Yes.
A Vanguard newspaper, federal government to scrap HND dichotomy, empower polytechnics to award degrees. The Minister of Education explains that this is aimed at repositioning technical and vocational education. He says that in terms of competitiveness in the future, we really need to turn around vocational education. He is right on this bit. However, it has to be pointed that upgrading polytechnics to award degrees again leads to that unhealthy bias about certification again, degrees again. You don't have to have a degree. You know, these days you need quick certifications and skills, you know, for the modern economy. If you have something to say quickly so that we can go.
Yeah, I think, let me allow you first.
Especially in the type of economy that we have, where there's a lack of jobs, there's an important demand on skills and being able to do something with your hands. You often hear people talk about having a handiwork, having a skill, having something that they can fall back on when they're not able to fall back on the economy and get a job. So not all polytechnics are at the same level as universities when it comes to infrastructure and, you know, academic standards. So, I mean, it blurs the lines a little bit and brings about some confusion. And this overlapping, this confusion can eventually cause, you know, there to be a lack of specialized technical training anymore. It might be lost with time. So, I mean, it has its pros, it has its cons. Benga, you were about to say something.
I think it can't be overemphasized the need to expand the skill acquisition capacity of many of these tertiary institutions, because many people are just coming out as certificate holders now without lacking the capacity to bring something to the table.
Very true.
But given that situation, we have a situation where I think the unspoken rule about the creation of university is a total transformative process. That's why they call it university education. It brings about people from different, but while the Polytechnic then was to focus strictly on the technical aspect of the issue. So they come out being the technical personnel, while the university person was meant to come in as a managerial personnel. Because so now I think it's a welcome development, if you ask me, to expand this scope.
To the international headlines, all papers, the Daily Telegraph, you know, talked about Trump at Davos, you know, saying the U.S. has been treated unfairly. Greenland is a small ask for all that the U.S. has done to, or done for Europeans. He went back into history, reminding the Europeans that the U.S. had Greenland already as a trustee and returned it to Denmark after defeating the Germans, Italians, Japanese, and the rest of them in World War II. He wants immediate negotiations, which I think it's already in place. He won't use force. He has promised. I mean, it's a real dilemma for Europe. And right now, they're not sure which way to head, even if strong statements have emanated from different European countries. So Europe heavily relies on the U.S. for military. So if the U.S. cuts that off, they will be in real trouble. So their hands are sort of tied, Yolanda.
Yes, their hands are tied. And I think all eyes have been on Donald Trump even before he arrived in Davos. So many people were talking and anticipating his arrival. And now we're seeing him backtrack on his stance on Greenland, because initially he had said he was going to come with force. But now I think maybe with mediation and, you know, closed door discussions, we are now seeing him say that, you know, we're willing to negotiate. So, I mean, there's a lot of different narratives coming up from what happened yesterday. And despite all these observations, Trump is never short of words, as he was also urging NATO to say, allow the U.S. to take over Greenland.
All right, we have to go.
Okay. Absolutely.
We're out of time. Those were your headlines for today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Constance and Benga Ashiru. You're watching Daybreak with